Colleagues, good morning and welcome to this press briefing. I'll be making two press briefings in succession. The first press briefing pertains to issues around the stabilization of the exchange rate and the control of inflation. The second press briefing pertains to the remuneration framework for the conditions of service for the civil servants. Let me start with the issues or measures, additional measures that government is taking to stabilize the exchange rate and to control inflation. The government has recently taken significant steps to stabilize the exchange rate, as announced through the presidential policy statement and other measures. The impact of these measures have signaled to the market that government is a total commitment to enhancing the country's foreign exchange management systems. However, additional measures to further strengthen these systems and measures based on the following and well-established facts relating to the country are required. One, the key drivers of exchange rate stability in economy are fiscal deficits and money creation by monetary authorities. These two variables have long been dealt with successfully within our economy, in the sense that we've eliminated large deficits, and we've also put the growth of money supply under control. Number two, in addition, the current account has moved from a deficit to a surplus position over the last 3 years. The trade balance has ceased to put pressure on the exchange rate. Three, the economy is generating substantial foreign exchange at the moment, which is adequate to fund imports and other external payments. Four, the confidence deficit among economic agents as a result of past hyperinflation experiences has resulted in higher than usual demand for US dollars as a store of value. This is reflected not only in the increasing holdings of foreign currency balances in the banking system. These balances, however, do not efficiently circulate in the economy due to structural issues in the banking sector. Five, the lack of confidence and high inflation expectations have incentivized economic agents to engage in power market benchmarking in the pricing mechanism and in a skewed preference for US dollars for commercial transactions. And the forward exchange rate pricing is also the norm, thus creating a vicious cycle of increasing prices, which is self-fulfilling and is generating higher month-on-month level of inflation, as well as fueling adverse inflation expectations. The proof of this lies in a recent econometrics study done at the University of Zimbabwe, which indicates that inflation is not being caused by the normal real economic variables, but by behavioral variables such as confidence, adverse inflation expectations, arbitrage behavior and opportunities, among other things. Six, the skewed preference for the US dollars in the economy has also resulted in a larger than normal demand for foreign exchange to support domestic transactions, as opposed to foreign exchange being predominantly used to fund external transactions. I now proceed to pronounce the additional measures. Based on the above economic facts, government has put in place the following additional measures to build further confidence in the economy. One, entrenching the multi-currency system in law. The government has clearly stated its intention of maintaining a multi-currency system based on the dual use of the US dollar and the Zimbabwe dollar in the main. However, the market lacks confidence in the multi-currency system. However, the market's lack of confidence in the multi-currency system is causing us challenges. And I want to assure you that this multi-currency system is here to stay into the foreseeable future. And to eliminate any speculation and arbitrage-based activities on this issue, the government has decided to embed the multi-currency system and continue to use it, or to make sure that the US dollar is used as a transaction currency in law for a period that includes the 5 years that covers the NDS1 period. So this will be in place for the entire NDS1 period. Number two, entrenching the interbank market exchange rate in law. The interbank market exchange rate is now being determined by banks on a willing buyer, willing seller basis. Utilization in all economic transactions of this formal rate is now made mandatory by law. While economic agents are free to price their goods in US dollars or Zimbabwe dollars, there are no price controls, you know. The equivalence of US dollar price and Zimbabwe dollar prices for commodities should be strictly based on the current interbank exchange rate as determined by the willing buyer, willing seller rate. I move on to other stabilization measures pertaining to fuel, maize meal, and bread in our shops. If we start with the interventions in the fuel sector. Over the past few months, following significant pressure on global fuel prices due to global tensions, the government has been intervening in the fuel sector in order to stabilize fuel prices. These actions have included the downward review of government levies on fuel, and number two, the release of fuel from the strategic fuel reserve. This week, the government completely removed the levy on diesel, or rather brought it down to 0 cents, and significantly dropped the levy on petrol. It's now down to 4.7 cents. This action prevented the price of fuel from breaching the $2 per liter mark. I now turn to the grain issue. The government is taking action to increase the supply of maize and wheat into the market in order to ensure greater availability and price stability. And this is being done through releases from the strategic grain reserve. Let me start with wheat. Government is going to immediately release 21,000 metric tons of wheat over the next 1 month to the millers. This is beginning in July. This will be done in terms of pricing at the import parity, the price calculated at the prevailing interbank rate or the willing buyer or willing seller rate. Millers have also indicated to us as government that they will intend to import 70,000 metric tons of wheat over a 3-month period. The wheat will be sold at the import parity price converted into local currency equivalent at the ruling exchange rate. And now turn to maize. Again, government will immediately release 7,000 metric tons of maize, which really is an outstanding allocation to millers, which they've already paid for, but they were just delays in releasing due to some technical issues. But this will now be released immediately. That's 7,000 metric tons. In addition, government will release a further 25,000 metric tons of maize on the back of a swap arrangement with millers, because they intend to import a similar amount over time. So, but we immediately hand over 25,000 metric tons of millers to process and satisfy the market. Thereafter, a further release of 27,000 metric tons of maize from the strategic grain reserve will also be made. This is at the ruling price of $75,000 Zimbabwe dollars per ton plus $90 per ton. This $90 per ton is being converted at the prevailing interbank rate. Let me make further observations. It has been noted that millers, some millers, tend to put the burden on government to replenish their grain stocks. Whilst we appreciate the importance of ensuring food security to the nation, millers should be encouraged to source their own grain stocks whenever possible. We encourage them to do that. We've given the licenses to import freely, and they should be able to do that. But that said, the government will expedite importation of maize from the region to make sure that we have enough stocks to supply to our citizens. The government of Zimbabwe remains committed to maintaining macroeconomic stability and the elimination of harmful and destabilizing arbitrage conditions that have pervaded the economy at the expense of the generality of citizens. I thank you. Colleagues, thank you for listening to that first statement. I now proceed to give a statement regarding the review of civil servants' salaries, both monetary and non-monetary benefits included. The government of Zimbabwe recognizes and appreciates the tireless work and unwavering commitment to duty by all civil servants across the key arms of the state, namely the executive, which is all of government, the legislature, which is parliament, and the judiciary, including grant-aided entities, agencies, and independent commissions. To this end, government has been closely monitoring developments in the macroeconomy with a view to ensuring that exogenous shocks from adverse macroeconomic developments do not seriously erode the purchasing power of civil servants' salaries. As such, government has been reviewing the cash and non-cash benefits, or monetary and non-monetary benefits of civil servants as follows. I will start with the executive. Just recently, the government announced that civil servants' base salaries have been increased by 100% with effect from 1 July 2022, and that negotiations are continuing through the National Joint Negotiating Committee (NJNC) platform to come up with additional salary measures for all our civil servants. In addition, serving members of the civil service have the following benefits: a housing loan guarantee scheme, that's one; two, civil service housing loan scheme; three, there's access to the duty-free importation for single motor vehicle for personal use by any civil servant. I wanted to highlight those three non-mandatory benefits. Let me turn specifically to the health sector. With particular regard to the health services sector, the government has reviewed with immediate effect upwards the health sector specific allowances in the following areas. One, we've increased the on-call allowances, which apply to doctors and laboratory scientists. Two, we've increased the night duty and standby or call-out allowances, which apply to nurses, nurse aides, and general hands in theatre. Three, we've immediately increased the nurse managers' allowances. Four, we've increased the special health equalization factor, which applies to all eligible staff. And then five, also we've increased the COVID and infectious disease risk allowances. In addition, the government has reviewed the non-monetary benefits for the health sector in the following ways. One, the provision of institutional housing for health workers, starting with our big centers, namely Harare and Bulawayo, but then proceeding and expanding into the other geographical areas. Two, the provision of housing loan guarantees. Three, provision of efficient transport facilities, starting with our referral or central hospitals, including the 6th hospital HCA. Addressing deficiencies in the cafeteria system and reoperationalizing this system is also another action that we're taking as government. Including, also we include the local production and sourcing of uniforms for our health sector personnel. So that's what the action we've taken immediately to give relief, but also support to our health sector employees. I now turn to the teachers. I talked about the monetary benefits, the 100% increase in salaries beginning 1st of July 2022. In addition, the other benefits, some of them are quasi-monetary, some of them are non-monetary. This is the restoration of the advancement awards. That's the first benefit. The two, the payment of performance awards, which had been withheld due to financial constraints in the past, which these have been restored, and these will now be processed with effect from 1st of July 2022. For this purpose, members will now be placed on their correct employment grades. 3, the payment of school fees for up to 3 biological children per teaching family. This benefit applies to teachers, and payment will be made directly to the schools and will be up to a prescribed limit per biological child. Currently, this limit is set at $20,200 per child per term, and Treasury is ready to disburse the required amount for the first term. 4, the provision of 34,000 housing units as institutional accommodation for teachers. To cushion teachers from the rising cost of accommodation, government has committed itself to provide 34,000 housing units within and outside school premises over a period of 5 years. Finally, the provision of transport facilities to ferry teachers of both rural and urban areas is being implemented and has already commenced. This is facilitated by existing structures under the Civil Service Bus Fund and the Rural and Urban Mass Transport Assistance. I now want to highlight the security sector. Government values the critical role played by the security services in the country, in our economy. We cannot have economic growth without the requisite peace. Substantial progress has been made in ensuring competitive remuneration and general improvement in the conditions of service for members of the security sector. I want to highlight the 4 areas where government is trying to make some improvements. 1, government has introduced the military salary concept and its equivalent across the entire security cluster, and that covers various categories of benefits. In addition, the government has accelerated the acquisition of operational vehicles targeting management within the security cluster. 3, the government is also instituting immediate measures to increase access to institutional housing and transportation for serving members of the security services. 4, the security services sector also has access to housing loan guarantee schemes to enable members to purchase houses in the areas of their choice under the frameworks being finalized by the service commissions and the respective and participating financial institutions to this scheme. Let me further highlight the provision of housing loan guarantee schemes for home ownership across the entire civil service. The Public Service Commission is collaborating with the Ministry of National Housing, Social Amenities, Ministry of Local Government and Public Works, and Treasury to work towards the facilitation of the housing loan guarantee facility for civil service, under which the government will be the guarantor of housing mortgages applied for by members through the identified networks of banks. Consultations between relevant stakeholders have already begun and have been initiated by the Public Service Commission. I also want to further highlight the continued payment of the $75 COVID-19 allowance. Recognizing the significant risk factors faced by civil servants who are mostly frontline workers, government introduced the $75 per month as a COVID risk allowance. This amount is still payable in foreign currency and will continue to be paid for the foreseeable future. I now turn to the $100 cushioning allowance, which we introduced 3 months ago. recognizing the inflationary pressures faced by public sector workers in the face of adverse macroeconomic developments and the impact of dual currency pricing, government introduced $100 per month cushioning allowance payable in foreign currency. This allowance also continues to be paid and will subsist for the foreseeable future. That was basically emoluments, monetary benefits, non-monetary benefits pertaining to the executive arm of the state or all of government. I now turn to the legislature, which is Parliament. Parliamentarians and staff of Parliament, the Parliament of Zimbabwe, have also had various reviews implemented across both salary and non-cash benefits as follows. And this is with immediate effect. One, salaries have been increased by at least 100% with effect from 1 July 2022. Sitting allowances have also been similarly increased with immediate effect. Government has also introduced with immediate effect a contributory medical scheme where government will contribute 80% to the subscriptions, similar to the scheme which is in place for the rest of the civil service. 4, government has introduced a duty-free importation allowance for a second motor vehicle for use by parliamentarians in their public service work. 5, in order to ease transport challenges for employees, government acquired buses for use by parliament staff. 6, in the spirit of leaving no one and no place behind in public engagement, government has recently introduced a constituency visit allowance to improve close relations between elected officials and their constituents and electorate. Fuel is provided to members in all constituencies, irrespective of the distance to their constituencies from the capital city. And this is also in proportion to the size of their constituencies. So the larger the constituency, the higher the fuel allocation, because there's a lot more area to cover. Finally, members of the legislature are also being paid the combined $175 per month, which comprises the $75 linked to the COVID risks, and then the $100 cushioning allowance recently introduced. Finally, I turn to the judiciary, the third arm of the state. All members of the judiciary have received a salary increase of a minimum 100% with effect from 1 July 2022. In addition, an allowance that recognizes and aligns remuneration with peers in the legal profession has also been put in place. Number 2, members of the judiciary are now also benefiting from the housing loan guarantee schemes and the housing loan scheme, as well as the duty-free importation of one motor vehicle. Number 3, members of the judiciary are also being paid the combined $175 per month, comprising the COVID-19 allowance of $75 and then plus the $100 cushioning allowance. In conclusion, colleagues, therefore, the government of Zimbabwe reiterates its commitment to pay competitive remuneration to civil servants and to all arms of the state in order to retain critical skills and derive efficient public services. Accordingly, the government will continue to assess conditions of service for all civil servants across the entire state in order to appropriately and timelessly benchmark these in line with economic development. I thank you.
French multi-currency system and the auction system into law. How is this going to be carried out, and is this not retrogressive in the spirit of what has been said, to say that you need to buttress the local currency more than promoting?
Thank you, Takuchi Marcus from Zimbabwe's TV. You speak of restoration of advancement awards. This is something we heard in February when the $100 was introduced. And when you speak to Apex Council, Mrs. Alexander, for example, she says nothing has sufficed. Is this not another talk show where we're hearing things which will not be implemented? And when you also tell us that you're signing the multi-currency system into law, and yet in your observations you stated that there's a preference of the US dollar for domestic transactions, isn't this then allowing people to actually dispute towards the US dollar even more? Thank
you.
Anyone? Third one. Andy, go ahead.
Thank you, Minister. My first question, Minister, is that this raft of schemes or incentives we're giving to health, judiciary, civil service, and parliament, was this budgeted for in your previous budget, or does it imply that you have to have a supplementary budget on it? You talked about your first presser looking at stabilization of the exchange rate and inflation. I'm not clear how these measures are going to tackle inflation of 191%. Like you mentioned that. It doesn't seem like there's anything new in there about inflation rate. And I've got a couple of questions. My third question is, you talked recently about N0 being under control in terms of an inflation driver, but you also said that board money wasn't. I needed to understand what you meant by that, and also how you're going to get broad money under control. And my last question, Minister, I know I could go on all day. My last question is: we just received the presser from the Monetary Policy Committee. It's just been officially released, and they've increased interest rates to 200%. My concern about that.
Pertains to from the German agency, and that question was pertaining to what? So,
Okay,
remind me.
I asked. It has always been said that the local currency is the way to go. You need to buttress the local currency. Now that you are entrenching the multi-currency system into law, is that not retrogressive?
So that's the gist of the question. Basically, we're entrenching the multi-currency system in the sense that we've already announced that the use of the US dollar will continue over the NGS1 period. So we want to provide assurance to the market that there is no reversal. Emphasizing that these will be honored. And we've said that from the 1st of July, these will be paid. That's an announcement. And then we also seem to imply that the putting these exchange rate issues into law is entrenching the US dollar as against the Zimbabwe dollar. No, we're entrenching both. From Andy Hodges, basically we're saying that there's nothing in here that supports the notion of price stability. Certainly the release of grain from the GMB, both wheat and maize, should go a long way in improving the supply in a way that should help us tackle any supply constraint driven increases in prices from maize or wheat related products. And then in terms of salaries, basically we're making sure that civil servants have an additional income to make sure that they can tackle the increases in inflation that we're seeing. In terms of tackling broad money, basically the increase in interest rates, I didn't want to announce that. I wanted the government to announce that, so you got it. Yeah. So that's exactly how we're dealing with the growth in demand for credit by increasing the price of money, which is the interest rate. I'm simplifying it. That should go a long way in making sure that we reduce the demand for unnecessary credit in the economy. But notice that the 200% interest rate is in line with the year-on-year inflation that has been recently released at 191 or 92%. Year on year. Yeah, you referred to the issue that perhaps this will push up NPLs and so forth. On that note, I'll hand over to Piers Gumata to further elaborate on the issue of interest rates and NPLs. And Fumbe, if you wanted to add on any of
thank you, Honorable Minister. Look, I spent 28 years lending money, and there's one very clear aspect. NPLs are caused by bad lending, never by interest rates. And I think I need to add that we actually need a complete rethink of the Zimbabwean business model that we are currently running. We cannot have corporates in this country continue to have business models that are both based on monopoly pricing and unreasonable market power, access to cheap credit, access to cheap foreign currency, access to cheap power, because they are always coming to ZTC and to ZESA, wanting sub-economic tariffs, access to cheap energy or cheap fuel, and we even struggle. We actually have some companies that want to do some canning of tomato, wanting to get a national project status, because they also want access to lower taxes. So the business model of most corporates here has been based on these 4 fundamentals, which we need a complete rethink on. So this argument that the productive sector will not be able to borrow, you should be able to sustain your business on correct borrowing and correct interest rates. Actually, the lack of confidence that we all write about on a daily basis is actually a reflection of the inability for us to create savings. So we also now need to restore the value of savings, because that is the only way we can create long-term capital. So again, we have had the corporates that have been subsidized, and I will hesitate to say this, by pensioners, widows, and orphans, by paying sub-economic interest rates. And that is actually, in turn, helps the creation of capital. And it helps the pensioners, helps the savers, at the expense of actually creating savings in the economy. So that argument, I think we need to take it off the table, and we have business that can sustain themselves in this economy on the basis of correct fundamentals. Thank you, Honorable Minister.
So, Minister, there's one more issue. I mentioned that whether you need a budget, supplementary budget, because this seems like it's not budget for some of the announcements you've made. Would you need to introduce a supplementary budget?
So far, in terms of our assessment, these increases are within the current budget. We are still assessing as to whether we need a supplementary budget or not. But remember, a supplementary budget also relies on additional revenues, because we've been living within our means. So would have the revenues first to be able to spend those revenues and therefore request Parliament to allow us to spend those revenues. So we'll come back to you in due course. Yes. Let's do, I think, 3 more. Yeah.
Ranger from Bloomberg, could you please advise Minister on your projection for growth rates in line with the measures that you announced today? Thank you.
My name is Kobe Masaf from Mr. My question is to the Minister. We have been talking about surplus in the food.
um, putting a law to support the multi-currency system is going to address the stabilize the exchange rate because we've already put, I think, legal instruments which kind of already do the same thing. So I don't know if you can explain how that addresses the exchange rate problem. And if there's been a suggestion made about floating the Zimbabwe dollar and dollarizing the economy, what is your comment on that?
Thank you. From Bloomberg, I have the growth forecast figure for 2022, but as is tradition, we will announce that formal revision during the midterm budget review on the 28th of July next month. Maybe suffice to say for now that we will announce a slightly lower growth rate than the 5.5%. Let me turn to the colleague from Newsday who says, are we in any economic crisis? Look, of releasing grain from the strategic reserves, but also allowing millers to import a free that is meant to, again, to ensure food supply. And other measures of this designed to cushion civil servants to make sure that we can increase their purchasing ability, and measures designed, again, to restore the value of our currency, such as the increase in interest rates. So these are normal policies that any government takes action on in order to deal with the situation that we face, and that is not unique to Zimbabwe. We check with all the other countries in the region, we see a very similar type of action or actions being taken. And across the world, as we speak, US inflation is on a 40-year high. It was last this high 40 years ago. The same thing applies to the UK, and we hear a similar story around the world. So inflation is a challenge everywhere, and all the governments are doing whatever they can to make sure that we bring this issue under control. And that includes the increase in interest rates, making sure that we have real interest rates prevailing in the market. Coming to the colleagues from Victoria from Newsday, entrenching the multi-currency into law. Again, let me hand over to Matanga or Vumbe.
Now, I think the current legislative framework was not fully infringing the use of the US dollar. I think among us, one other thing that you notice from the the statutory instrument we are going to issue later today, is that we are also saying that if you are going to go to the banks and borrow in US dollars, you have to repay in US dollars. Because banks were also very much concerned to lend in US dollars because they were worried that you could borrow today in US dollars and 2 years, 3 years from now, you will come and you want to pay in the local currency, thereby affecting their balance sheet. So it's another measure that we are actually entrenching in the legislative framework. We did not have that provided in the previous framework that we have. Coming to the issue of whether we are dollarizing or not, I think the position has not shifted, because if you check on two key indicators, one which is the national payment system, and you look at the volume of US dollar transactions versus Zim dollar, you will find that we are still having 70% of the transactions on the national payment system are still in the local currency, our Zim dollar, and only 30% is in US dollars. So there is actually no direct question of whether we should dollarize or not. I think the preference that is there, contrary to popular belief, still indicate that there is a preference for transacting in Zim dollar. It's also even reflected in the revenues of government, in the taxes that we collect. We also collect them in exactly the same ratios, where 70% of our taxes are collected in the local currency and only about 30% is in US dollar. So even when we talk about dollarization, it's very clear that we do not have enough US dollars circulating in the economy to cause us to want to dollarize, because the majority of our citizens, the majority of our corporate are largely still trading in the local currency. And again, then to just come back to add on to whether we are in a crisis or not, I think the Honorable Minister was very clear, because I think for the past 6-7 years, the issue was always around fundamentals, address the fundamentals. And these fundamentals, which the minister announced earlier, were the ones where the pressure was coming from to say, address them. And we have addressed them. So now the argument is now shifting to something else. But these are the same fundamentals which everyone was clamoring for, which have been addressed. I would want to add that possibly within the MPC statement that has just been released, the governor should have indicated that for the period ending May 2022, we have had a record inflows for exports at 4.9 billion just up to May, which actually indicates that if we follow the same run rate, we are on course to achieve a record 12 billion of exports. You then ask now the justification for the exchange rate movement that we are seeing against such record exports.
Which is arising from the Ukraine-Russian conflict. I think there's no doubt about it that this is also affecting Zimbabwe. And there is been a disruption of global supply chains really also filtering into Zimbabwe, and also the uncertainties in terms of those resumption of these global supply chains. And then the huge increases in freight globally also, we have seen those also impacting heavily in terms of imported inflation. So it's a global uncertainty, and also some of the uncertainties on the recovery post-COVID, where most major companies right now are facing shortages of labor. It's just labor has disappeared for them. So these are issues also affecting the local economy. Thank you.
Very well. I'm sure there are additional questions. I saw Anne lifting his finger. another colleague at the back, I think, is actually about that.
So thank you, Minister. You mentioned wheat and maize, but those are not the only commodities that are driving prices. Like we talk cooking oil, that's importation, soybeans, and so on. And it appears that we're focusing on wheat and maize as if that's the only reason why, well, that's one factor why prices are rising for the Zimbabwe citizens. But what about the other commodities, which are basic commodities in their own right, outside of bread and flour and so on?
Thank you.
Okay. The question is on fuel, Minister. Citizens continue to ask that why are they being forced to buy blended fuel when there could be a freedom of choice to buy less?
Thank you. Third one.
Okay, Professor, I just want you to break it down for. I'm passionate about civil servants because of what they do for the country. You announced these changes, and now we have a law coming that allows a retailer out there to sell in US dollars. Are we now saying if Andy Hodges wants to sell his goods in US dollars, the law does not touch him and say he can sell in strictly US dollars, or we'll have that rate going up? Because already, for instance, bread in US dollars is cheaper when you're trying to buy an article. What's your message to a civil servant who has been looking forward to a salary increment in US dollar terms to also try to match up with the reality that's going on? What's your message to a civil? Can you just address the civil servant who was in that negotiating room last week but one, who said, I'm not happy with the 100% increment in Zim dollars, and I want something in US dollars? Thank you.
I think let's deal with these three, then we'll do another round. On the question of the why focus on wheat and maize only, let me distribute the questions I'll ask. Yes, go back to that respond to that.
Look, I think obviously you're very right that there is a common basket of about 11 to 14 basic commodities. But I think within that common basket, I think as government, we actually want to focus more on what we regard as the staple food, and which is the basic food consumed by everyone. With no replacement, you cannot replace maize meal largely, and neither can you replace bread. But you asked the question about cooking oil, but there are other alternatives for cooking oil. And we also have even issues really with the oil expressors to actually question, to say, throughout the years, and when we were through the bags, do you remember we had cooking oil being made from sunflower, from groundnuts, from maize, from cottonseed? We actually need to be asking our oil expressors why now we want 90% of that cooking oil to be expressed from soybeans, which we are importing as soya cake, while we could actually support local production of alternative raws that can actually result in us manufacturing that cooking oil. But the concentration on maize and bread is on the basis that these are the key staple foods that are consumed by the ordinary citizens.
Okay, but you'll still see prices going up in the other commodities. That's the issue. You may be able to restrain the price of bread and wheat, but the other commodity prices may still start going up, unfortunately. That's the...
Yeah, but within those other 14 basic commodities, we have already taken the necessary interventions by opening up a duty-free importation of those commodities. So we have already intervened to try and curb monopolistic and unreasonable price increases on the other 14 products through that particular SI. And it's actually working, because we've seen prices of some of those basic commodities actually starting to decline. But I think there is always global pressure. If the cooking oil is being only manufactured from soya, which then leads to feed into the general global food crisis, and the increase just even on shipping costs, as Mr. Vumbe indicated. But we believe that the initial SI to open up those other products for importation should actually start to deal with the varying prices of those commodities.
I turn to the question then on blending, that you want to be free to buy any fuel. We don't quite appreciate that everyone is forced to use blended fuel. You see, the blending strategy is one way of curbing sharp increases in fuel prices. And this has worked very well. In fact, without the current blending taking place, the price of fuel would be higher. So this is to your benefit and to the benefit of the public. Most governments around the world practice this policy of blending fuel for that reason. Even in the US, United States, they have a blending policy. And in countries such as Brazil, which are even more advanced in terms of biofuels, you see even more aggressive policies in those kind of countries. So this is not abnormal. It is normal in countries where they're able to do it. And this has been very helpful in containing the sharp increases in prices. The last question had to do with the payment for civil servants in US dollars. As we said earlier, government earns 30% of its revenues in US dollars and 70% in Zimbabwe dollars. It follows, therefore, that whenever we're thinking of the salary increases, you see more increases in domestic currency in terms of Zimbabwe dollar than in US dollars. So the current offer has been based on the currency of dominance in terms of these revenues, which is Zimbabwe dollars. So that's where this at least 100% offer is based on. But as I said earlier, and as government has already pronounced, we'll continue our discussions with civil servants to hear their concerns. And again, we look at our coffers to see whether there's any flexibility at all to increase either way, either Zim dollars or US dollars. But as I said, our constraint is this 30-70 inflow in terms of 30% US dollars, 70% Zimbabwe dollars. But also we're putting in place several, numerous non-monetary benefits that I've outlined. It's not just the salary, but also the non-monetary benefits also matter. PS wants to add something. Yeah.
I think one thing that I also need to highlight is that from a policy perspective, government policy has always been to pay the lowest civil servant 75% of the PDL. That's the policy. That's what we've always aimed for. So if you do the numbers at any exchange rate of the 175, right, added onto the Zimbabwe dollar component, you will actually find that we are now above that 75% threshold. But I think what we've actually seen being propagated on social media is that when we are talking about salaries for teachers, for nurses, there is a deliberate omission of the US dollar 175, as if it's not being paid. So when someone says, oh, they're getting 60,000 as a minimum, they are deliberately excluding the US dollar 175 at official exchange rate. You will find that it takes the overall salary above 100,000 US dollars. And even if you look at the latest number that we have for the forward datum line, it's actually lower than that number. And so it actually means that from a policy perspective, we are actually within the policy. I would also then want to dispel another notion that has always been shared very widely, to say that previously, during the government of national unity, the minimum salary was 450 US dollars. That's also not correct, because 540 US dollars. That's also not correct, because we know that at that particular moment in time, the exchange rate in the market was 1:2.5. So if you actually want to work out the correct US dollar, you have to take that 540 and divide it by 2.5 to get what was the real exchange rate or the real salary in US dollars. And if you take the 175 US dollars we are currently paying plus the 60 or so thousand as the minimum salary, we are not even far off from what the civil servants were being paid at that particular date. But we have also conveniently converted that as 1:1. But when you actually know that at that particular moment in time, there was an applicable exchange rate in the market, and the real value was around 200 and something US dollars. It's something that had gone on for long to say they were paid 540. No, it was not 540. It was 540 divided by 2.5, which was the prevailing exchange rate. Thank you.
Thank you. Last three questions. Last three. So you choose. Let's run an auction of questions here.
My name is Emerson Manges. I'm from
Manges.
Yes, Manges from Financial Gazette. My question goes to PS Bamaka. You spoke about 70% of
25%.
rather say 70% of transactions are still being done in local currency. Doesn't that concern you to say that? I think to me, I would feel like it feels as if the ordinary citizens may not be banking hard currency, or rather corporates may not also be probably concealing their US dollar transactions. So to say that most of your policies are being informed from that perspective, probably isn't it taking you probably off track, or doesn't it concern you that it means that more US dollars are probably still sloshing around?
Who's next?
Thank you. My name is Shara from Business Weekly. Permanent Secretary Mthuli said that our exports for up to May at 4.9 billion. Given that the surrender requirement for the RBZ is about 40%, it means that we are getting about 1.9 billion to the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. Monthly, it would be around 392 million. I understand there is a lag. In terms of the money coming into the country, but the disparity between the 392 million versus 25 million that is sold at the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, there is a huge disparity there. Maybe if you just explain how that happens.
This one is directed to the PEMSEC. You said there was a 2.5 exchange rate obtained during the GNU. I need clarity because when I have a increased gradually. But my question is clarify PMC. Because when we were going to an ATM with card Ramdara, my US, I know she got 400 and something. And now we're talking about an exchange rate. I did the math that you said. It's coming down to 216. It wasn't 216, it was 400 plus.
Maybe take a fifth one. What do you think? Yes.
My question is on the pricing of cooking oil. We've seen in the shops the price of cooking oil is priced in US dollars, whereas those companies are actually getting the forex from the auction. So can the minister explain why we actually have such kind of preferential pricing in US dollars for certain products? And also, if we are to make an effective pricing range for all the commodities, why don't we have sort of recommended retail pricing in US dollar, and there is a recommended retail price for the Zim dollar equivalent, so that at least there is no kind of sort of advantage being taken by retailers to the clients.
Thank you. Four questions. The first one is you corrected my last Mangez, right?
Yeah.
Fingers. We talked about the 70-30 split in transactions, and your view is that, well, is it still not really meaning that our citizens are not banking their US dollars? So I'll direct that to PS to deal with that.
I think the only other missing aspect of those ratios that I didn't indicate is on the bank deposits. Was even the deposits in the bank also reflect that 70-30 split. So when you have the deposit in the bank reflecting 70-30 split, the revenues reflecting the 70-30 split, and the payment also reflecting the 70-30 split, I think it's a clear indication. Yes, there will be some element of non-banking or of funds circulating outside the formal system. That has always been the case in Zimbabwe, even when we had a mono currency system. But to actually indicate that most of the transactions are still occurring in Zim dollar, up to end of May, about 12.2 trillion was actually transacted as Zim dollar. So we are still seeing that huge preference for Zim dollar. And it's just answering the issue around the 40% from Mr. Shara. I think I've just been corrected to say that the 4.9 billion is actually total foreign currency inflows. It's not all, it's cumulative. And it's all foreign currency inflows. So we need to break down and say how much of that were exports and how much is the 40%, and then address your question. Your question might still be relevant, but again, not all of the retention that are at 40%. We've got some companies that have applied because they are recapitalizing or because they've got special projects that they are running where they may be allowed to retain more than the 60% for various reasons. So it's not a flat the 40% for everyone. I think to explain the 540, the 400 that we're talking about, I also think I will also then add another analogy to that. Why do we have an issue of legacy debts or of funds that were in people's account that they could not access? It's because that 500 was not available to everyone, or even that ATM, it was not all ATMs that it would go to, because I was still in the banking sector during that time. I think only 2 or 3 banks. And if I actually want to give myself credit, one of the banks was the institution that I was working for, where you could, well, it was one of the 3 banks which you could go and withdraw US dollars. But the reason why today we actually speak and we are trying to compensate some of the depositors is because they could not access that money, because it was not there. You could only access it at 2.5, then you were assured of getting it. But at 1:1, it was only to very limited depositors who could actually access their money at that 1:1. But it was not available to everyone.
Thank you, Piers. If I can add on the issue of the gap between what we're earning in terms of gross receipts and what is on the auction. I must say that we'll do the numbers of the breakdown for you just to assist. But also there are other liabilities beyond just commitment to the auction by those who need to import. External liabilities that we need to honor and debt service. So all those again come in to take their share in that 392 million that you mentioned. So there are other liabilities beyond just the auction commitments. You asked about the gold coins. Of course, the Reserve Bank will do further pronouncements on how that will be operationalized in detail. But this is a project that the Central Bank has long, the government has long through the Central Bank with
allowed to ask you No, I'm serious. Yeah. You can ask me private. Because you're a government employee. You want to have questions for journalists, but please immediately come over and ask me a question. Yes, at the back. My question is I understand that the foreign currency, the appetite for foreign currency by different states to bring raw materials, as well as the need for to show value. But I understand that the government, what is the position with regard to the appetite that government has for the foreign currency? Because also the figure, the infrastructure that we are saying about so I want to know in that video that you said that the most time who continue to be placed through the NGS one. What is the government's position making as a way of improving the confidence around the $10 out of the current NGS that we know that the $10 given a lot of competitiveness in terms of the that we are currently using. So I want to know the roadmap for the government maybe to support fully the usage of the local currency by then minimizing its appetite also on the foreign currency. Thank you very much, colleagues from ZBC. You said Cuthbert, right? Your name? Jefferson. Thank you very much for that multifaceted question. I'll take the aspect of another aspect of what I'm going to add. You say that the government has appetite for foreign currency and therefore may be increasing demand for foreign currency. That is not the case. Government is able to take care of its foreign currency needs from the 30% or so revenues that we receive in hard currency from our taxes. So we're raising enough US dollars to meet government needs from whatever taxes come in. And in addition to that, whatever we have as excess, we've been using that to support the auction. For the longest while, they've been releasing as much as 15 million per week, 10 to 15 million per week. Of course, it varies depending on our capacity, but it's exact opposite. We do not source money from the auction at all.
But then we've also done more. We've made sure that those that we pay in local currency are also, managed a little in terms of, bunching the payments, but also splitting their payments, especially the contractors, putting their payments half in hard currency, half in local currency, to make sure that we limit the amount that they may use to approach the foreign market and therefore push up the exchange rate. So we're managing all of that, but government is not sourcing money from the auction market at all. Maybe PS issue there something.
Yeah, no, I think you've covered, Honorable Minister, very, very well, that we do not go into the market to seek foreign currency. We have actually been suppliers of foreign currency into the market by paying some of the contractors and some of our requirements directly in foreign currency, and also, as the Minister has indicated, supporting the auction. So we have been providing, as government, the corporates with this world, as I indicated earlier, with very cheap forex for a very long period of time as government. So we are not the ones that have created excessive demand of foreign currency on the market. It's definitely not government. But just also to reiterate, to say, one of the major issues of confidence in the dollar has been the issue of actually holding there's a store of value. And that's why the monetary policy statement has now addressed that by ensuring that for the first time in a very long period, that we have interest rate that speaks to inflation. And that should actually allow anyone who wants to invest, anyone who wants to save, a decent return of their money in Zim dollars. There is absolutely no need now to get Zim dollars and want to rush to spend it, because you actually be losing value. There will be good value in retaining it, because in our discussion as we were aligning our policies with the central bank, they also indicated that they will also be reviewing the deposit rate so that they are commensurate with the other side of the balance sheet. Because in the past, we've only concentrated on the lending rate without ensuring that depositors also get a fair return for their money. This monetary policy statement and the measures we are taking on the fiscal side are now meant to address that key economic fundamental.
Thank you for my time. Additional comments?
Honorable Minister, sorry, there was a question which was asked earlier, which I don't think you addressed, about once this law comes into effect on, putting the multi-currency usage of US dollar and Zim dollar, once it comes into effect, does this effectively mean that businesses, retailers will be able now to charge in US dollars if they want to do that?
They are already doing that. They are already doing that. And we last in the shops. But what it does, this engenders a much stronger sense of certainty about our currency regime. That the use of the dual currency or multi-currency more legalistically is here to stay, at least for the period of the NDS1 period. Just to engender a sense of certainty and no policy possibility of policy investment. Thank you, Honorable Minister.
Thank you, yes. Thank you, yes. Colleagues, thank you very much. We will be releasing the official statement very shortly, in the next 10 minutes, so we all have access to the minister's presentation. Those of you who don't know where to find it, can inbox me, and I'll send them direct. It will be out there.
Thank you very much.
No, the music. Then I realized it was coming from.